Good night, darling.
The clock is ticking for planet Earth, and time is running out. Unless we reverse the damage caused by humanity, we'll lose even more of our forests and natural habitats for wildlife and many important and endangered species. But there is hope. We can turn back the clock. Working with local communities, young people, and other partners, we're inspiring actions through the message of hope across every continent, protecting endangered species and their habitats, and creating a more harmonious relationship between people, animals, and our shared environment. Help rewind the future with the Jane Goodall Institute.
That was a lovely welcome, thank you. Kia ora everyone, tēnā koutou katoa, haere mai welcome. Thank you all for coming. It really is such a pleasure to welcome you to Dr. Jane Goodall Rewind the Future, presented by the Jane Goodall Institute of New Zealand and by my friends at Loop, who are out the back very proudly now, and supported by Newstalk ZB and Yealand's Family Wines. What a wonderful occasion this is. I think every single seat in the Aotea Centre has been sold. I met two women outside who've driven up from Hamilton to be here this evening. And the reason for that is that we've come, go Hamilton. And the reason for that is we've come to be in the company of someone truly special. Someone whose two-eyed curiosity, singular determination, and intelligence have informed our collective understanding of the misunderstood and the not understood and the powerless in a way matched by very few people alive. We did not know chimpanzees. We did not know they used tools. Incredibly, we did not know they were omnivores. And we did not know their complex social constructions and interactions. But we do know all of that now and more, because almost 6 decades ago, a 26-year-old named Jane Goodall watched and watched and watched and told the world what she had seen. And the world was truly changed by it. It was revolutionary work, enough for any lifetime, but yet here she is in 2019, aged 85, almost as far from Gombe as you can possibly be, using the respect and acclaim she's earned to make a stand on behalf not only of chimpanzees, but the planet. We are here tonight to hear from this remarkable woman and also to support the Jane Goodall Institute of New Zealand, or JGINZ. Tonight is a night of hope and celebration, which is a little confusing in some respects because chimpanzee numbers are now so low and their habitat is under such threats, and they, of course, are not alone. What the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change told us is that if we don't restrict global warming, seas will rise catastrophically, weather extremes will heighten catastrophically, insects which are essential for the proper functioning of all ecosystems will be imperiled catastrophically, and on it goes. And the planet, which has so generously hosted us without ever once sending us a bill, will not be able to sustain us or many of the plants and creatures we share it with in ways recognizable to those of us who have lived our lives as if our environmental overdraft facility was infinite. So where is the hope? Well, the hope is still in our capacity for action, still, and in the capacity for that action to make a difference. And that's what the Jane Goodall Institute stands for, and that's what Jane Goodall stands for. At JGI, they are on a mission. They're taking action on both global and local sustainability issues and working towards creating an informed and compassionate critical mass of people who will work to create a better world for people, other animals, and our shared environment. The message is, it's not too late. The message is, if we act, we can make a difference. So the JGI are focused on sustainable development and protecting biodiversity. They promote sustainability education, increasing our awareness of sustainable living options, of sustainable consumerism, and the power of our compassionate choices. They are inspiring and empowering young people. And as we saw with the climate strike yesterday, and as Greta Thunberg has shown us, young people are leading us. Is there anyone here tonight who was on the climate change strike yesterday? Well, when I went to Wellington College, I constantly wagged, and never once for a good reason. And so I just want to say, I'm really proud of you, young people who did that. And so JGI's Sustainability and Citizenship Education Program, Roots and Shoots, is designed to increase compassionate decision making, designed to reach into schools, designed to foster engagement, precisely the kind of engagement we saw yesterday, designed to support projects that make a difference, designed to empower young New Zealanders as change makers and as leaders. And yesterday, at a rather joyful occasion with Dame Patsy Reddy at Government House, also attended by Dr. Melanie Vivian, CEO of the JGINZ, Dr. Goodall presented two young New Zealanders, Chloe Swarbrick and a brilliant young college student who is going to be joining us shortly, and who I am very excited about as a future leader of New Zealand, with the inaugural Jane Goodall Trailblazer Awards. So, a trailblazer celebrating trailblazers. Magic. The JGI's next major step is the development of a digital platform for educators, learners, and the general community on sustainable futures. By being here tonight, you are supporting that, all of that, and more. Proceeds from this event and from any merchandise sold at the interval go directly to JGINZ. Thank you, therefore, for attending. It is great to have you here, and by buying a ticket, you have already made a difference. You can, if you're feeling really flush, text Jane to 53338 to contribute another $3, but no pressure, because you've already done your bit. But if your friends say, oh, gee, I wish I went to that, you can say, hey, text Jane to 53338 and I'll tell you about it. There is real hope in your presence. When Jane Goodall says every individual matters, every individual has a role to play, every individual makes a difference, she is talking about you. Very shortly, we'll be hearing from Dr. Goodall herself. Her theme, our theme tonight, is Rewinding the Future. She will speak to you for roughly 45 minutes, give or take, with a special guest in the middle. And after that, we will have a quick interval, maybe a drink or two, and then we're going to have some very special music from three members of the Fly My Pretties collective who are truly outstanding. I was watching them rehearse over there early this afternoon. We'll do sound checks. I don't think Fly My Pretties rehearse. Age Pryor, Anna Coddington, and Lawton Cora, and they're just going to be special because tonight is a night of celebration. And then after that, Dr. Jane Goodall and I will sit there for a bit of a fireside chat. So I think we're in for a pretty special evening. Please be sure that your cell phones are on silent, although the organisers, JGINZ and Dr. Goodall, are rather partial to you tweeting out key messages. If you're on Twitter, the hashtags Jane Goodall and Rewind the Future will unite your messages as they head out into the world. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving a damn. Thank you for wanting to hear from this remarkable woman. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be with you and to be with her. In a moment, we're going to hear from our remarkable guest of honour. But first, just in case you've arrived from another planet, a little something about her.
It's been an amazing journey, this life of mine. This planet has filled me with the wonder of all living things, great and small. We cannot ignore this earth that surrounds us, that feeds us, shelters us, replenishes our bodies and our souls, and stretches our imaginations, where animals, plants, air, water, all care for us. We're all interconnected. People, animals, our environment. When nature suffers, we suffer. And when nature flourishes, we all flourish. I do believe in the possibility of a world where we can live in harmony with nature, but only if every one of us does our part to make that world a reality. So that when you look back over your journey, your life, you can truly say, I did make a difference.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it is my great treat and pleasure and privilege to invite to the stage Dr. Jane Goodall.
Well, thank you for a wonderful introduction, and thank you for a wonderful greeting. And let me start with my signature greeting, which... Me, Jane. So, of course, I add my thanks to everybody who's made this evening possible, this tour of New Zealand possible, the people you've already heard mentioned. Maybe there's some board members of JGI New Zealand here. I know Patricia is, and our chairman, Neil, his nickname is Giblet, so I keep forgetting his real name, Neil Gilbert. Well, he made the mistake of telling me what his nickname was at school. So for me, he's Giblet, but he's really Dr. Neil Gilbert. Must be proper. At any rate, JGI staff and board members and volunteers, actually when I'm traveling around the world 300 days a year, there are 35 Jane Goodall Institutes, and everywhere I go, the wonderful people of the JGIs are helping me to do these never-ending tours. And people like yourselves coming out this evening and wanting to hear what I have to say. And of course, I want to share what I have to say with you, or I wouldn't be here. But there's one person I especially want to thank. You know, none of us can go on our life's journey by ourselves. We all need support. We need support when we fall, and we need to be helped back up onto our feet. And the person I want to thank most is my amazing mother. I was born loving animals. People say, where did your love of animals start? I was just born that way. A lot of people have the misconception that it was a toy chimpanzee given to me by my father when I was 1.5 that triggered my love of animals. I loved them long before that. And this amazing supportive mother actually supported my love of animals. She didn't even get mad when she found I'd taken a whole handful of earthworms, earth and all, into my bed. She just said, Jane, they need their garden, and we took them back outside. And a story that I'm sure many of you know, but I tell it again for a reason. We lived in London when I was a small child, and when I was 4.5 years old, Mum took me for a holiday in the country onto a farm, and a proper farm, not one of these intensive factory farms where animals are imprisoned, rather like the inmates of the Holocaust, but a farm where animals grazed in the fields. And I was given a job to collect the hens' eggs. And they roamed about in the farmyard, but at night they went into one of the little wooden hen houses to keep them safe from the foxes. And around those hen houses, there were nest boxes where they were supposed to lay their eggs. So I went round with my little basket and lifted up the lids, and if there was an egg, I popped it into my basket. But apparently I began asking everybody, but where's the hole on the hen big enough for the egg to come out? Because I couldn't see a hole like that. And nobody satisfied my curiosity. And so what I do remember vividly is seeing a hen going into one of these hen houses, and I must have thought, she's going to lay an egg. Crawled after her. Big mistake. Squawks of, I suppose, fear, she flew out. And again, in that little 4.5-year-old mind, I must have thought, well, no hen will lay an egg here. This is a frightening place. But I'm now on the path of discovery. And so I went into an empty hen house and waited. And waited. And waited. Some of you know 4-year-old children. Don't you find it strange that apparently I was gone for over 4 hours? Well, finally, and I remember this vividly too, a hen came in. She had her back to me. She rose a little on her legs, and I saw this slightly soft white object fall onto the straw. And I don't know who was more excited, me or the hen. Buck, 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 buck. Buck, 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 buck. Anyhow, there's my mother. It's beginning to get late. She's actually called the police. So you can imagine how scared she was. And yet, instead of grabbing onto me as she saw me rushing towards the house, how dare you go off without telling us, don't you dare do it again, which would have killed all the excitement, she saw my shining eyes and sat down to hear the wonderful story of how a hen lays an egg. And the reason I tell that again, isn't that the making of a little scientist? Curiosity, asking questions, not getting the right answer, deciding to find out for myself, making a mistake, not giving up, and learning patience. It was all there. And a different kind of mother might have crushed that early curiosity, and I might not be standing here now. She continued to support my love of animals by finding books about animals, thinking I would learn to read more quickly. And back in those days when I was growing up, television hadn't been invented. That's how long I've been on this planet. And so I learned from books, picture books and other books, and we had very little money when I was a child, and World War II broke out. I don't even think that children's books were printed, but we got our books from the library, and also I found a little second-hand bookshop. I was 8 years old when I met Dr. Dolittle, and I know some of you will have read the Dr. Dolittle books. Probably some of you have seen the films. There were no such things back then. And Dr. Dolittle was an English country doctor who decided that he would go and doctor animals instead of people. And he was taught animal language by his parrot. I wanted to learn animal language so badly. And for a while, when I was 8, I pretended to all my friends that I could understand what the birds were singing about and what the dogs were barking about, and they believed me. At any rate, eventually I stopped pretending. But when I was 10 years old, I found a little book in that second-hand bookshop, and I used to save up my few pennies to try and buy a book, and I just had enough. And that little book, which I took home and read from cover to cover, was called Tarzan of the Apes. And naturally, being a romantic little 10-year-old, I fell passionately in love with this glorious lord of the jungle. And what did Tarzan do? He married the wrong Jane. Right, he did. At any rate, I knew there wasn't a Tarzan, but that's when my dream began. I will grow up, go to Africa, live with wild animals, and write books about them. I had no thought of being a scientist. Girls didn't grow up to be scientists in those days. But everybody laughed at me anyway, because they said, you don't have money, Africa's far away, how do you think you'll get there? And it's probably dangerous, and anyway, you're just a girl. Dream about something you can achieve. But not my mother. What she said to me, if you really want to do this, you're going to have to work awfully hard. You're going to have to take advantage of every opportunity, but don't give up. And that's the message I've taken around the world, particularly to young people in disadvantaged communities. And I wish Mum was alive to know how many people have written to me or said to me, Jane, I really want to thank you because you've taught me that because you did it, I can do it too. Well, I was good at school, good at my work. I usually came up near the top in exams. But when I left school at 18, there wasn't enough money for university. I had to get a job. There was just enough money for a boring old secretarial course. I got a job in London, and then came the opportunity, a letter from a school friend inviting me to Kenya for a holiday. Her parents had bought a farm there. But how to get the money? You couldn't save money in London. So I went home, and I worked in a hotel around the corner. And I think for 5 or 6 months, because, after the war, there wasn't that much money around. I made sure that all my customers knew I was saving up to go to Africa, so the tips were probably a little bit higher. But eventually, after about 6 months, I had enough for a return fare. You had to prove that you could return. And in those days, there weren't planes going back and forth with tourists. I went by boat. I was 23 years old, and a 23-year-old back then was very naive, sort of comparable maybe to a 16-year-old today, and there were no young people going off and spending time in foreign countries. It just wasn't happening. So again, how amazing that my mother let me go. I remember that journey well. It took about a month. It should have taken 2 weeks, but the Suez Canal, we should have gone through the Suez Canal and down to Mombasa in Kenya. But there was a war with Egypt, and the Suez Canal was closed, so we had to go all the way around the Cape. And the first place I set foot in Africa was Cape Town, which is beautiful. Mum had some friends there, and they said that I could stay with them for the 2 days the boat was in harbor. And at first I loved it, but then I noticed this writing on the back of every seat in the parks, on the doors into the restaurants, the doors into the hotels, all over the place, in Afrikaans, slechts blank. What does this mean? And I was told it means white people only. And suddenly Cape Town wasn't nice anymore because I didn't grow up to think about people, judge them by the color of their skin. My grandfather was a congregational minister, and that's simply not how we were brought up. So I was glad to leave Cape Town. And when I got to Kenya, it was better because Kenya was just moving into independence, and the atmosphere was very different. Well, I stayed with my friend, but then somebody said to me, Jane, if you're interested in animals, you should meet Louis Leakey, famous paleontology, spending his life searching for the fossilized remains of early Stone Age humans. But he was also interested in modern animals, relating their bone structure today with that of their prehistoric ancestors. I went to see him at the Natural History Museum. He was curator. He took me all around. He asked me hundreds of questions, and I think he was really impressed because I'd read so much, everything I could, and spent hours in the Natural History Museum in London, so I could answer many of his questions. And guess what? I did that boring, tedious secretarial training. 2 days before I met Leakey, his secretary had suddenly quit, and he needed a secretary, and there I was. And so, because of that boring secretarial training, I was able to move into a world surrounded by people who could answer all my questions about the mammals and the birds and the reptiles, the amphibians, the insects, and the plants of Africa. It was really magical. And I think as the weeks went by, Leakey became more and more impressed by my passion for animal life. He let me go with him, his wife, and one young girl to Olduvai Gorge, which is a sort of mecca for people interested in fossils. It's in the middle of the Serengeti Plains. A tiny little expedition. This is 1957. There were no roads there. It was just going cross-country. It was really exciting. I was now in the wilds of Africa, surrounded by animals, so many animals. And after the hard day's work, the other young girl, Gillian, and I were allowed to walk out onto the plains. One evening, there was a young male lion. He was about as far away as the whole length of this auditorium, maybe a little bit further. And I think he was curious about me and Gillian. He'd never seen anything like us before. And so he followed us 2 or 3 lengths of this auditorium, which was, well, it was a bit scary, but it was also very exciting. And I truly believe it was that evening around the campfire that Leakey decided I was the person he'd been looking for, to go and live with and learn from not any animal, but the one most like us, the chimpanzee. I couldn't believe it. Did I want to try? You bet I did. But it was a whole year before I could start on that study. First of all, Leakey had to find the money. And how difficult to find money from a young girl who hasn't even been to college and is straight from England. But eventually, a wealthy American businessman said, okay, here's money for 6 months, half a year, we'll see what she can do. Second problem, back then what we call Tanzania today was Tanganyika. It was one of the last outposts of the crumbling British Empire. And the authorities were absolutely not prepared to take responsibility for this young girl. But in the end, because Leakey just went on and on, they said, oh yes, okay, she can come, but she cannot come alone. Who volunteered to come with me? That same remarkable mother. People say, oh Jane, you were so brave to go off into the forest. I was just doing what I had dreamed of doing since 10 years old. But Mum, well, first of all, it was not like probably when you go camping today. We shared an old second-hand ex-army tent, and the ground sheet was just a piece of canvas laid on the ground. And if you wanted air to come in, you had to roll up the side flaps and tie them with tape, and in came the air along with spiders, scorpions, centipedes, and sometimes snakes, which I didn't mind, but poor Mum. And the baboons, they're very entrepreneurial, and they're very quick to sense a new food source. And so very soon they were raiding the camp, and we had hard work to kind of batten things down so that they didn't take all our food. But you know, the males have these big canines. And so there's Mum with the scorpions and the centipedes and the snakes and the baboons, in addition to which we had been told we had to take a cook with us. And the British people living in the nearby town, they'd more or less all employed him because he was a fantastic cook, but he had a great love of cooking sherry. Well, they decided there won't be any cooking sherry in Jane's camp, so they'll have a wonderful cook. Took him less than 2 weeks to find an extraordinarily potent brew made of fermented bananas. And so there's Mum, not only with all these creepy crawlies and baboons, but a slightly inebriated cook. She was the brave one. But she also did something really important for me. She boosted my morale, because in those early days, the chimpanzees would take one look at me and disappear in the forest. And you know, as weeks turned into months, I was getting really worried because I knew, given time, that I could gain their trust. But did I have time? The days were ticking by. And I knew that if I didn't see something exciting before that money ran out, that would be the end, and I would have let Louis Leakey down. So it was Mum, when I got back depressed in the evening, who pointed out, Jane, you're actually learning more than you think, because I'd found a peak, and through my binoculars, I was learning the kind of foods the chimps were eating. I was learning about the calls they make, how they bend over branches and then sort of weave them into a comfortable nest to sleep at night. And so I really was learning quite a bit, but it wasn't close up. And I knew that to really, really understand them, I had to get close to them. It was so sad that Mum left just 2 weeks before that breakthrough observation, that time when I saw the one male who had begun to lose his fear. Wasn't that close, maybe a little bit further than the edge of the platform there. But I saw him breaking off grass stems and using them to push into a termite mound and pick off the termites with his lips. And I saw him break off leafy twigs, and to make those into tools, he had to carefully remove the leaves. So he was using and making tools. At that time, science believed humans and only humans used and made tools. So Leakey was extremely excited when I sent him information about this. But so many of the scientists back then said, well, why should we believe her? She hasn't been to college. She's just a girl. And it didn't really bother me because I didn't know too much about what was going on. I was just excited by what I'd seen. But the great thing was that that observation enabled Leakey to go to National Geographic. And they not only said they would continue funding the research, but they sent out a photographer and filmmaker, Hugo van Lauwijk, to document the things that I was beginning to find out more and more. And some of you will have seen the latest documentary, Jane. That was Hugo's footage, and it was that footage that went out into the world, and scientists had to believe the tool-using behavior because it was there. And I was now settled down. I could relax. I could slowly allow the chimpanzees to get I could get closer and closer to them. And so I began to learn the personalities of David Greybeard and his friends out in the forest. And I think of them now with such nostalgia. They eventually became almost like members of my family. I knew them so well. And I was also learning how like us they are, kissing, embracing, holding hands, patting one another, begging for food, swaggering. And I was fascinated from the beginning in the behavior of mothers and their infants. And just as in human society, there are good and less good mothers, very few really bad ones, but there's definitely some who are better than others. They're protective, but not overprotective. They're affectionate, they're playful, but above all, they are supportive. And they will run to the defense of their child, even if it's pretty obvious that a higher-ranking mother will attack them if they dare to threaten her precious child. So, looking back now over the nearly 60 years, it's very clear that the offspring of those supportive mothers do better. The males rise to a higher position in the hierarchy and probably sire more infants, and the females are better mothers and may keep more of their infants alive. It's fascinating to see that the chimpanzee has a long childhood, just like we do. So the child is totally dependent on the mother for 5 years, suckling gradually less frequently, riding on her back gradually less frequently, always sleeping in her nest at night until the new baby is born. And even then, the older child doesn't move off, but remains emotionally dependent on the mother. And so you see the bonds get stronger between mother and child, but also start to develop between the brothers and sisters. And for me, this was absolutely fascinating, and it still is. I think this long childhood is important for them as for us, because they have such a lot to learn. They don't go to school, of course. Their school is the forest, and they learn by observing what the adults do, and then imitating and practicing. And if we define culture, and this is one definition of human culture, behavior passed from one generation to the next through observation, imitation, and practice, then we can definitely say chimpanzees have their own primitive cultures. We now know that in different parts of Africa, there are different tool-using behaviors. Gestures that are inborn, innate, may be used in different contexts, and so on. And so I was also fascinated by male dominance. And some males are really, really determined to get to a high position in the hierarchy. And when one male is challenging another, they swagger, they bristle their hair, they bunch their lips in furious scowls, they wave their arms around. They're just like some human politicians. And so there's two ways for a male to reach the top. Firstly, by using strength and aggression, and then he's not well liked by the others, and he doesn't stay long in that top position. Others are more intelligent, and they form alliances and only challenge higher-ranking individuals when the ally is there to support them. And so we're still learning new things about these amazing chimpanzees, even though the research has now been going on for almost 60 years, unbroken, the longest in the world. It was when I'd been out there for 2 years that Leakey wrote to me and said I had to get a degree. He wouldn't always be there to get money for me. There's no time, he said, to mess about with a BA. I've got you a place in Cambridge University to do a PhD in animal behavior. So I was really nervous. And can you imagine when I got there and was faced by these intimidating professors, so many of them told me I'd done everything wrong. I shouldn't have given the chimpanzees names. That wasn't scientific. They should have had numbers. And I couldn't talk about their personalities, although they are as different one from the other as we are. And I couldn't talk about their minds capable of problem solving, although it was very obvious. And I certainly couldn't talk about their emotions like happiness, sadness, fear, anger, and so on. Those were unique to us. Fortunately, when I was a child, I had a wonderful teacher who taught me that in this respect, these professors were completely wrong, totally wrong. That was my dog, Rusty. You can't share your life in a meaningful way with a dog, a cat, a rabbit, a rat, a horse, a cow, a bird, and not know. Of course, we are not the only beings with personalities, minds, and emotions. We are part of and not separated from the rest of the animal kingdom. And thanks to the chimpanzees being also so like us biologically, we share 98.6% of the composition of DNA with chimpanzees, and there are other similarities in blood, in immune systems, and the anatomy of the brain. And that, coupled with the similarities in behavior, forced science to come out of this narrow way of thinking. And today, well, if you're a student, you can study animal personality, and you can study animal emotions. And we know that the part of the brain that's activated when we feel sad, if that same part of the brain will be activated in an animal that we think is sad, so the animal is sad. It's very obvious if you have an animal when they're happy or sad. So the whole field of animal intelligence is something that is really exciting people now. And it's not just chimpanzees, elephants, dolphins, and so on. It's so many other animals. And I hope in our fireside chat later, we can discuss a little bit more about that. Well, anyway, I got my PhD. And I went back to Gombe, and I built up a research station. And students began coming, not many, because Gombe is a very tiny national park. Students began coming, studying different aspects of chimpanzee behavior. and there were local people employed to help follow the chimps and record their behavior day by day. And they were the happiest, definitely the happiest days of my life. Not only was I learning about these amazing chimpanzees, but I could spend hours out in the rainforest. And I came to understand how everything is interconnected and how each little species, no matter how small, has a role to play. And even though a small insect may seem insignificant or a little plant, it may be the main food source of another species. And so if the little one becomes extinct, so another may become extinct. And this can form a chain reaction and can lead to entire ecosystem collapse. And that's why this recent report about the 1 million animals and plants in danger of extinction is so frightening. Well, I was, not only learning about this amazing life in the forest, but I also felt a strong spiritual connection to Mother Earth when I was out in the forest. So why did I leave? Why am I traveling 300 days a year around the world? Because at a conference in 1986, it became very clear that right across Africa, chimpanzee numbers were dropping and their forests were disappearing. And there was the beginning of the bushmeat trade, the commercial hunting of wild animals for food. And mothers were being shot to steal their infants for sale locally as pets or overseas for entertainment. And some chimpanzees actually are eaten in some African countries. And also there was growing human population with people moving deeper into the forest, taking with them diseases. Chimpanzees are biologically so like us that they can catch human infectious diseases, but they have not built up resistance to them. And so it was a dire situation. And we also had a session on some conditions in captivity. And the worst was seeing secretly filmed footage of our closest living relatives in 5-foot by 5-foot barred cages in medical research labs. So I went to that conference as a scientist, planning to continue my wonderful life, but I left as an activist. And it's since that time, October 1986, that I haven't been more than 3 weeks consecutively in any one place. And that's only twice a year, if that. But although I left knowing I had to do something, I didn't know what to do. However, I believe that if you really want to talk about something and do something about it, you need to have some first-hand experience. And so the first thing I did was get into some of the medical research labs, and that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I remember going into this one lab. There was rows of chimps on both sides of the room, alone in these iron-barred cages. And I went down on my elbow. I was wearing a mask, and I looked into the eyes of this male. He was about 30 years old. And I thought of the chimps at Gombe with their soft, leafy beds, grooming the others, having this wonderful forest life. And here he was with a cement floor and a motor tire. That was all. And tears trickled down under my mask. And he looked intently into my eyes and reached out a gentle finger and wiped the tears away. And so that led to the start of a campaign joined by other groups, of course. But it was only 4 years ago that finally all the chimpanzees, all 400 from the National Institutes of Health in America, were released into sanctuary. At the same time, I knew I had to do something about the situation in Africa. So I managed to get a bit of money, and I was able to get to 7 different African countries and talk to the people studying the chimpanzees there and try and give talks about conservation. And I learned a lot about what was happening. And at the same time, I was beginning to understand the plight of so many African people living in and around the chimpanzee forests, the crippling poverty, the sometimes total lack of good education and health facilities, and the increasing degradation of the land as these people were cutting down trees in their desperation to find some more fertile land to grow food, to feed themselves and their families. And it came to a head when I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park and looked down at what had been part of a forest that stretched right from East Africa to the West African coast. And I looked down in 1990 at a tiny island of forest surrounded by completely bare hills. More people living there than the land could support, too poor to buy food from elsewhere, struggling to survive. And that's when it hit me. If we don't do something to help these people to find ways that they can make a livelihood without destroying the environment, we can't even try to save the chimpanzees. And so that's when JGI began its program. We call it Take Care or Tokari. Not a bunch of arrogant white people going into the 12 villages around Gombe and telling them that, well, we were going to help them put things right. It was a carefully picked group of 7 local Tanzanians. They went into the villages, they listened to the people and asked them what they thought we could do to make their lives better. And so we began restoring fertility to the overused farmland without chemicals, I hasten to add, and also bullying the local Tanzanian authorities to improve health and education, which they should have been doing anyway. And the people gradually came to trust us, and we could introduce water management programs, and what I think is perhaps our best intervention, microcredit, so that women could take out tiny loans for environmentally sustainable projects, like getting a few chickens or doing a tree nursery, something like that. And then when they pay back, and over 90% of all the loans we've given out have been paid back, then they can take out, if they wish, a larger loan. And then they're proud, they have ownership. So we also provide scholarships to keep girls in school during and after puberty. It's been shown all around the world that as women's education improves, family size tends to drop. We provide family planning information. And this program has been so successful that it's now in 7 other African countries, protecting the chimpanzees and the forests where they live, because the people have come to understand that it's not just protecting the wildlife. It's important to protect the forest because of what the forest will do for them, providing clean water and fresh air, and that it's for the benefit of their own children's future. And so they're now our partners in conservation. And all the villages throughout, 104 villages throughout the chimpanzee range in Tanzania have volunteers who go out into the forest and monitor the health of the forest, because most of the chimps live in village forest reserves where they're not protected. But now the villagers are proud and they're protecting their forests and the animals in the forests. So a very successful program. Of course, costing money, and I find I'm traveling even more around the world talking about the problems and hoping that people will feel moved to help to support them. Well, as I'm traveling around, I'm learning more about what we have been doing to our planet. You heard about that in the introduction this evening. And all those things that were mentioned and more. And here I come to a very puzzling question. Yes, we're very like the chimpanzees, but we're different, aren't we? And if I'm asked what the biggest difference is, we've developed this language, the use of words, and with this language we can teach children about things that aren't present. We can talk about and learn from the past. Most important of all, we can bring people together to discuss, people with different outlooks on life, to try and solve the problems. So How is it possible that this most intellectual creature to ever walk the planet is destroying its only home? And yes, animals are way, way, way more intelligent than we ever used to think. But we sent a rocket to Mars. A little robot crawled off, took photos of the surface of the red planet where at one time it was thought human life might perhaps survive. We know from those photographs we really don't want to go to Mars, do we? We've got this one little precious blue and green planet that is our only home, planet Earth. How can this most intellectual creature be destroying its only home? How can we have brought about a situation where 1 million animals and plants risk extinction? How can we have brought about this catastrophe of climate crisis and the threat that it poses, not only to all the animals, but also to us? And it's happening. I've stood in Greenland with Inuit elders by that great ice cliff that goes up to the ice cap. And this was late winter, and the water was pouring out of the ice cliff. And the Inuit elders told me, even in summer, it never used to melt here. And now great icebergs were breaking off and floating in the sea. And that, along with the warming of the waters of the sea, is causing sea level rise. It just happened, I went straight to Panama after being in Greenland. And there I met people, indigenous people, who'd already had to leave their island homes because at high tide it was no longer safe for them to live there. And everywhere I go, people tell me that the weather patterns have changed, everywhere. And yes, the hurricanes and the flooding and the droughts are getting more frequent and worse. We're in the middle of climate change, climate catastrophe. And how have we let this happen? Because scientists warned us about this years and years ago. And you know, there are these 3 huge problems we have to solve. We've got to eradicate poverty, because when you're really poor, you destroy the environment in your desperation to grow food or get money from charcoal. Or in an urban area, you buy the cheapest food because you have to survive. You can't afford to ask, where did it come from? How was it made? Did it harm the environment? And we have to solve the unsustainable lifestyle of most of us. Don't we have more than we need? Don't we waste? Don't we waste food? Do we throw away clothes before they're actually finished? We waste a lot, and so many people don't bother to turn lights off. So many people don't bother about taps left running, and yet water is going to be one of the next great challenges because we are running out of fresh water and we're polluting the great underground aquifers. The third problem, which people tend not to talk about, but we must somehow, is human population growth. So if you actually think about it, does it make sense to think that we can have unlimited economic development as countries get richer and we think only about GDP on a planet with finite natural resources and where, in addition, more and more people are crowding onto this poor little planet? Don't ask me to solve those problems. I can't, but we have to, together. And that's what we must use this intellect for. But not surprising that as I'm traveling around, I'm meeting young people who seem not to have much hope. And when I began talking to them on all the different places where I went around the world, they all said much the same thing. We don't have hope because you've compromised our future and there's nothing we can do about it. Well, there's a saying that we haven't inherited this planet from our parents, we borrowed it from our children, but we haven't been borrowing our children's future, we've been stealing it. We're still stealing it today. But it's not too late. I truly believe there's a window of time, but it's closing. We need to take action now, and we need to take action together to start healing the harm. And that's why I began Roots and Shoots back in 1991. And it's a program which has as its main message, every individual makes a difference every day. Every individual matters. Every individual has a role to play in this life. And we decided from the beginning, it was just 12 high school students and me, we decided that they would form groups in their 8 different schools, and that each group would choose for itself. We wouldn't dictate to them. They would choose projects to help people, a project to help animals, and a project to help the environment. And so that program, instead of being limited to 12 students in Tanzania, instead of being limited to Tanzania, where there are 2,000 groups today, it's now in 60 countries around the world and growing. And we have members in preschool, we have lots in kindergarten, we have lots in university, and everything in between. And it is making a difference. We have a young, she was mentioned earlier, Maha, a young student here, and I've met Maha several times. She is receiving this prize. She has joined me on the platform before in Wellington, and I want her to come onto the platform now because this is your New Zealand example, symbol of hope. So Maha.
Well, kia ora, everybody. It is amazing to be speaking to you alongside one of the most influential people this world has ever seen, and someone who has been one of my biggest inspirations. If you had told me I would be given this opportunity to be here, I would have never, ever believed you. For my 12th birthday, I attended a Jane Goodall lecture. I didn't quite understand who I was going to be listening to, but I remember being surprised by how captivated and interested I was in what this woman was saying. It was like an introduction to a reality which I only thought existed in films, an introduction to the world of conservation and defying the stereotypes placed against you, of a woman who cared deeply about the state of our planet and how we as humanity treated our animals and the environment around us. My 12th birthday in 2014 became a day which awakened me to the possibilities of the things I could achieve in my life and awakened me to the undeniable need of more people opening up the conversation about how we currently treat our natural world and pushing to nurture our planet instead of exploiting it. I'm now 16 years old, and I live in the Kapiti Coast, which you may have heard of before if you've eaten the Kapiti ice creams. If you know, you know. And I attend Paraparaumu College, and within Paraparaumu College, I help lead my college's Societal, Environmental, and Animal Rights Action Group, also known as SEER. And I'm also well aware that there's over 2,000 people here. So if you would like to follow our Instagram, it is at SEEROfficialNZ, that's SEAR. Just chuck us a follow, really great content, I recommend, so please do that. But within SEER, we have all these amazing students involved who focus on campaigning and volunteering to help the people within the world, the environment around us, and the wildlife we share our planet with. What's incredible about SEER is that we are able to cover this wide range of different issues. So when somebody asks me what I think the biggest issue is happening currently on our planet, I'm always a little bit stumped by the question. I could say global poverty, but the areas which are the most impacted by poverty and famine are the areas which lack access to clean water. I could say mental health, because that is currently one of the biggest issues young people are currently facing in Aotearoa today. But people tell us that the way to improve our state of mind, to relieve stress and to relieve anxiety is by going outside, breathing in the fresh air, going to the beach with a friend. And those are some of the solutions that are placed in front of us. And we may have access to those things now, but what about in the future? What about when the world is truly at its final tipping point like it is now, and people's lives are destroyed, animals are suffocating, and our land is on fire, where will the fresh air be then? We have come to this moment in time where the planet has been placed under pressure to sustain many things. The fabric of life relies on our planet's sustainability as humans live off the land and animals to survive. Animals live off the land and other species of animals to survive as well. And our own planet, as in the land we stand on, the air we breathe, the plants we eat, depends on the processes of the food chain and the life of a living organism to continue to thrive. My point is that we all intertwine with each other in the circle of life. One aspect of our planet cannot sustain itself without the other. The earth is bigger than just an individual lost in our own minds and thoughts, as well as the city walls, so we forget about everything else our world has to offer. When we drink and eat, we must say thank you to Mother Earth. When we breathe, we must say thank you to Mother Earth. When we go outside, swim, run, have a picnic, literally anything that we do, we must say thank you to Mother Earth. Everything we do relies on the state of our planet. And if that's a fact, then why do we remain hesitant to make the big, sustainable changes that are needed for our planet as we ignore what seems to be the beginning of the end? It seems absurd to me that we are still having some sort of conversation about what we can and can't do to solve issues like climate change, ocean pollution, and biodiversity loss. Call for a plastic ban nationwide. No, that's too radical. Call for a country diet change where we all go more plant-based. No, sorry, burgers are actually a part of our genetic makeup, so we can't do that. There's all these excuses that are placed in front of us, but what society seems to be struggling with is looking forward. It's my future, it's my friend's future, it's my child's future, and well, it's your future too. Everybody seems to want to live this fantasized dream of a big fancy house and an expensive car and owning the high-end luxurious fashion that's actually polluting our planet. But why can't our concept of luxurious living and being normal involve a concept which actually involves sustainable living? Jane Goodall, you're one of the most inspiring people this world has ever come across. But do you know who also inspires me? The amount of rangatahi out there who will stop at nothing until our future is safe and secured. The young people who are currently fighting for the rights of themselves and our planet, just like what they were during the school strike for climate yesterday along Aotearoa. Yeah, that was really fun. There are so many talented, clever young people here in our community. Paraparaumu College has a robotics group that is currently inventing a beach cleaning robot to go on highly contaminated beaches. And that is just one example of many, which shows you how innovative young people are. When decision makers, businesses, our families talk about making sustainable changes, it calls for humans to break the mindset that we will lose too much in this world if we decide to change our ways, but reminding people that we will lose a lot more if we don't. So why protect the people, the animals, and the environment around us? Well, that's simple. This is all our home, and we are all needed if we are going to save our home from the dangers it's facing. Ngā mihi nui, thank you.
Well, now you see why one of my greatest reasons for hope is the young people today. The young people I meet everywhere wanting to tell Dr. Jane what they've been doing to make this world a better place. And I think we're going to talk a little more about hope later on, but I want to give you quickly my other 4 reasons. The next reason for hope is this amazing brain. We are beginning to use it to find ways that we can live in greater harmony with the planet, and ways in which we as individuals can leave lighter footprints each day. Next reason for hope, the resilience of nature. Give nature a chance, and places we have destroyed can once again become beautiful and support life. You have many examples here in New Zealand. And I talked about the bare hills around Gombe. If you fly over Gombe today, you won't see those bare hills. The forests have come back from the power of the seeds left in the ground, and sometimes the roots as well. Animals on the brink of extinction can be given another chance. So many amazing stories in New Zealand about that. And social media. With social media, we can reach out as never before in human history to gather people together to raise their voices about a particular issue. And finally, the indomitable human spirit. And this is where I introduce to you Mr. H. Mr. H was given to me 29 years ago by a man called Gary Horn, which is why he's Mr. H. And Gary went blind when he was 21. He decided to become a magician. Everybody said, but Gary, you can't be a magician if you're blind. Well, he does shows for children. He lays out his props beforehand. They don't know he's blind. I've watched him many times. And at the end, he'll tell them and say, you know, something may go wrong in your life. We never know. But if it does, don't give up. There's always a way forward. And he does scuba diving, and he does skydiving, and all sorts of other things. But to me, one of his most amazing accomplishments is he's taught himself to paint. And he never painted before. And he's done a little book. You can get it on Amazon. It's called Blind Artist by Gary Horn. And when he gave me Mr. H for my birthday all those years ago, he thought he was giving me a stuffed chimpanzee. I made him hold the tail. He said, well, never mind, take him where you go, and you know my spirit's with you. So he's been with me now to 65 countries. He's been touched by hundreds of thousands, millions of people, because I say the inspiration rubs off. And so in this book, you'll see a portrait of Mr. H. Now, Gary's never seen him. He's only felt him. And if you get that little book, Blind Artist, you will be amazed. So Gary is just one example of this indomitable human spirit. There are icons like Nelson Mandela, who emerged from 23 years in prison, 17 years of those hard physical labor. And he had this amazing ability to forgive, so that along with de Klerk, he was able to lift South Africa out of the evil regime of apartheid. And there are so many people all around us who show example of this indomitable spirit. And the thing that I want to say to you is that each and every one of us has that same indomitable spirit. If we grow it, if we let it out, if we let it free to inspire others around us. And so the indomitable human spirit, it's not only humans. And much later on, after our fireside chat, you'll see an example of the indomitable spirit in an other than human. So that's the message for now, that we've made a right mess of the world, that we better get our act together quickly and all try and do our bit to make things a little bit better, or a lot better. It depends who we are. And so for now, I leave you to remember that every single day you live, you make some difference, and you get to choose what sort of difference will I make today. Thank you.
I sat in the, I was introduced to Dr. Goodall before, and I went and sat in your dressing room, and I just kind of sat there and looked at her. Not in a deeply inappropriate way. I want you to know. But there's something about you. You are just, you're magnificent. And I think it's a life of doing the right thing. I think it's a life of doing good, ethical, decent, respectful things. There's a lovely sentence in Reason for Hope, A Spiritual Journey, where you said, "Always I have this feeling, which may not be true at all, that I'm being used as a messenger." Do you feel that way?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's as though I'm on a treadmill. I can't get off it. Sometimes I think, how long can I do this? How can I go on doing this? How can I get on another plane? How can I go through another airport? How can I give another talk? But there's nothing I can do about it.
That's Flint, isn't it?
That's Flint. That's probably my most favorite picture of me in a chimp. Because it reminds me of Michelangelo. You know, God reaching out to man reaching out to animal.
And Flint was the first chimp to be born at Gombe, right?
The first chimp whose progress I could study.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, he was. And he grew up to be such a spoilt brat. His mother was dominant. His brother became alpha male, and so his sister was protective, so he could get away with anything.
So let's look at that. That's you aged roughly 1, right?
1.5, actually.
1.5. With Jubilee?
With Jubilee. I still have Jubilee. He's virtually hairless now.
Where is Jubilee now?
He's at home in England, in my bedroom.
And if we think about, so Jubilee was born at London Zoo, right?
That's right. He was the first chimp to be born in London Zoo, and it was the Jubilee of whichever king and queen it was at that time.
And I don't know this, I'm just guessing, but I think people my age and older will remember chimpanzees' tea parties at...
Yes.
Certainly, yes.
Yes.
So did Jubilee have a life of being in a concrete enclosure doing tea parties and all that kind of stuff?
No, he would have, but I don't think he lived very long. And you know, those tea parties, they all looked sweet and they were dressed up chimps. They had shock colours under their clothes. It was very cruel.
So you went from a toy chimp whose life was in a concrete enclosure in a zoo having tea parties to this. And you talked before about the scientists at Cambridge who said, how dare you anthropomorphize, how dare you give them a name, how dare you claim they have feelings. But I just wonder, how dare us for having missed for so long what these creatures were?
Well, first of all, you know that they only knew them in captivity. They didn't know them in the wild. But I honestly don't think anybody who had anything to do with the chimp, they all knew they had personalities. And I don't believe that the scientists believed what they were saying, but scientists like to be able to prove, and scientists like you to be coldly objective. And it's taken a long time to prove that animals indeed do, scientifically proved, that they do have personalities and emotions. You can study it now.
There had only ever been one concerted attempt to study chimps in the wild, and that scientist had a trail of 22 porters.
That's right.
Prior to you going into Gombe.
Surprising he didn't see anything. And there was one other guy way earlier, and he wanted to learn something about chimps, but he was scared of being out in the forest, so he found a fruiting tree and he made a cage, but for some bizarre reason he felt the chimps would accept him if he went naked, covered with baboon shit. I mean, you know, people are very weird, aren't they? And he didn't see any chimps.
No. but I'm delighted his work's finally getting the acclaim it deserves. Can we talk about their intelligence? Can we talk about how intelligent they are?
Well, some people think that sense of humor is a sort of mark of intelligence. And actually, there's lots of examples of chimp having sense of humor, but my favorite is a gorilla. And this gorilla, Coco, had been taught American Sign Language. She knew about 700 signs, and she'd just been learning all her different colors, not just the primaries, but everything. And she was being tested one evening by a new person in the setting, who was told, please occupy Coco while her supper's got ready. So she's picking up objects, you know, what color is this? It's pink, signing, pink, and what color is this? It's gray, what color is this? It's black. And so the young woman picked up a piece of white cloth, what color's this? And Coco signed red. And the woman said, oh, Coco, you know better than that. What color is this? Red. And this went on. After a bit, the young woman said, Coco, I know that you know it's not red, so if you don't tell me what color it is, you won't get apple juice for supper. So Coco reached out, she took the white cloth, she picked off a minute speck of red fluff, and she said, red, red, red. But I mean, you know, it's not just chimps and elephants. Like I say, that's why I have Ratty. Rats turn out to be unbelievably intelligent. And they can do some of these tests that dogs do, but they do it better and they learn it faster. And this is a giant forest rat from Africa. And like ordinary rats, they have a fabulous sense of smell. So these guys, and I've met them and I've seen them being trained, they are trained to detect the smell of the explosive in a landmine under the ground. So in Africa, there's many places where there were these civil wars with landmines. And so they'll go along and then they make a little scratch where they smell. They've been credited with more or less single-handedly or four-pawedly or whatever, cleared Mozambique of landmines. And they're working in Angola and Cambodia, now in a great big wildlife corridor where the landmines are causing elephants to lose their feet. And now they've been taught to detect the ivory. Some learn rhino horns, some learn pangolin scales, and so on. And the advantage over dogs is they can climb up the crates in the ports and smell them up at the top and scratch on the wood. So they're completely amazing. And then Piglet, you must know Winnie the Pooh. Yeah, it's Piglet. But actually, pigs are as intelligent as dogs, more intelligent than some dogs. And I want everybody, like all of you after this, if you haven't done it, Google, not Picasso the artist, but Pigcasso.
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 Yeah.
And do that. I'm not going to tell you what you'll see, but you will be absolutely amazed. And I show it to a lot of people, and several people have said, gosh, I hate you, I can't eat bacon again. Which, of course, is exactly why I show it to them.
I want to show you something, and I'm going to go forward one on the photos that we've got on the back.
David Greybeard.
Yeah. Now
Early days when he just allowed me to groom him. But you can see he's completely at ease, totally relaxed.
He is, isn't he?
Mm.
So he trusted you, didn't he?
Yeah, totally.
And what was it that you understood then that you had to tell the world about these creatures, but our larger responsibility to them and to the planet? Because you told us about their society, and you told us about their tools, and you told us about the fact that they were omnivores, and you were the first person to tell us these things. But there was something more you understood you had to tell us, wasn't there? And it seems to me that the mutual respect, the mutual trust, the mutual kind of admiration. There was something larger, not admiration. No.
I don't think David admired me at all.
Didn't he?
He tolerated me and he trusted me, and the others came to do the same.
What was it you had to tell us? What was it that we needed to know?
I had to try and explain that, like us, they are sentient beings, they have emotions, and they're just so much more like us than anybody had ever thought. And when you think of the way we treat animals today, when we now know it's not just the apes, it's going right the way down the scale and where you would think. I mean, who would have thought 10 years ago how amazingly intelligent octopus are? Nobody would have believed you. And now it's proved, and there's photographs and film, and we know several species can carry half clamshells out into the sand and make houses. So they're safe because they have soft bodies. You can teach bumblebees to roll a little bead and drop it in a hole to get a nectar reward. And bumblebees who haven't been taught can do the same thing just by watching. And we now know that trees can communicate through the microfungi in their roots right under the forest floor. It's a very exciting world out there for young people wanting to go and learn about these things. So much more to discover. And we might, if we're not careful, things will go before we've studied them, before we've understood them.
Wasn't it wonderful seeing Maha speak before? Wasn't it exciting seeing her and her sense of impatience, that it's time to act?
It is time to act.
It is time to act. And what difference can we make? If we're thinking about, Anna talking before, our individual responsibility, if we think about, one of the things that every time we hear the word catastrophe or climate crisis or whatever, is one of the reactions that might engender problematic, and that is a degree of fatalism or resignation. So how important is the belief that we can still do something?
Well, I think that, more and more people are aware of all these problems, whether it's climate change or pollution or whatever it is, but they see the whole picture. And you hear this expression, think globally and act locally, but that's the wrong way around, because if you think globally, you get depressed and it's gloomy, and then you haven't got the energy to do anything. So you do nothing, you become apathetic. But if you say, okay, this is something I can do, like a group of our Roots and Shoots kids will get together and clean a stream. We were hearing about that the other day in Wellington. Or they can say, well, we can raise money and help those earthquake victims in a faraway country, or whatever it is they decide to do. So if you think of the whole world as like a giant jigsaw puzzle, and we've done so much harm, and where we've done harm, it's a black piece. But then we say, but we can do something about this, and that piece gradually becomes green as we heal it. So if you then know that all around the world there are young people and older people who are gradually changing the black to green, then you dare to think globally. So it's acting locally, knowing you do make a difference, that gives you the courage really to think about the global problems we face.
And that means we can all do something, right? We can. So if we think locally and act locally, or act locally and think locally, then it's incrementalism, isn't it? It's the jigsaw puzzle. That's the point you're making. That's
the point I'm making, but yeah. We've got to start now. Really, we have got to start now. We're getting very close to a point of no return, I think.
So what do we do? And I'm reluctant to ruin the evening, but what do we do when we have a man like Donald Trump? Yeah. So,
I wish it was just Donald Trump. There's Donald Trump, there's the new president of Brazil.
It's Putin.
There's Putin, there's our new president in Tanzania. And go around the world, find me somebody who's, here in New Zealand, you've got a great prime minister. Yeah, she's super. Look at Britain. Look what's happening there. It's being destroyed. I don't know what's going to happen after Brexit.
So there is denial. There is the Trump won't even sign up to the Paris Accord.
No, he pulled out long. And think what's happening in the Middle East, because he pulled out of the agreement with Iran. That's terrible.
So when our leaders and some of the biggest, most important leaders on the planet are failing us that spectacularly, how do we overcome that?
Well, the only way I could think, we can't really actually fight them. Mostly we can't. I mean, go to China, you can't do anything about the guy who's now set himself up as life president. So what I feel is work with the young people, give them some hope that, you know, they can do these changes so that they're ready to spring to action when those leaders, as they will, vanish. They'll die at some point.
You spoke beautifully about your mum before, and I don't really want to make you repeat it, other than to say, I guess, thank you to her for you. And what an extraordinary woman.
She was complete. I mean, the fact she let me go to Africa, the fact she didn't mind worms in my bed, the fact that she didn't get angry with the chicken business, and she was extraordinary. And then coming out and coping with all the scorpions and baboons and drunken cooks and things, you know, she was amazing. And my father, I really didn't know him because he went off. He joined the army when I was 5, when war broke out. And then my parents divorced when I was 12. So I didn't really know. Well, I knew him a little bit because Mum was very wise. He had a flat in London. I went and stayed there when I was in London. She wanted me to get to know him. But you know, something else she did, which I thought was amazing. In the war, we hated the Germans. And, well, of course, they were killing people. And they killed 2 of my uncles. And Mum wanted me to realize that just because of the Nazis didn't mean Germans were bad people. So she actually sent me off aged 18 and a half to live in a German family after the war. It was pretty amazing.
Incredible. What do good human parents and good chimpanzee parents have in common?
Support. Supporting your child, not forcing your child to do something that is completely wrong from the child's point of view.
Except the dishes, someone said down there.
Well, that's different. And we are not chimpanzees.
I just want to have a look at this because, well, another blonde hair conducting a little more research with that Jane Goodall tramp.
It's one of my favorite of Gary Larson's cartoons.
You became friends with Larson, didn't you?
Yes, I certainly did. He came to Gombe, but he nearly didn't come because the stupid woman who was in charge of JGI in USA, I was in Africa, I didn't know that, had come out, and she actually got a lawyer to write a letter to Gary Larson and saying that we were going to sue him because this was implying that I had sexual relationships with the twins. I mean, can you believe it? She didn't last. If you can't have a sense of humor, you really aren't a good person.
No, you aren't. For me, this is absolutely a celebration of the incredible against the odds access that your tenacity and patience obtained, right? That's what that cartoon's about, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's Gary Larson's quirkish sense of humor too. I mean, some of his cartoons are hilarious.
Your patience is a remarkable thing, isn't it? The 4 hours, that lovely story of waiting for the egg to be laid.
Yeah. Waiting for the hen to come and lay it.
And your patience in Gombe.
Yes. Days and days just sitting.
In which nothing new appeared to be happening. Nothing. And
not even finding them sometimes.
And your mum wasn't with you. She was back in your so-called camp in that very rudimentary tent.
Yeah.
So what was going through your head? What were you thinking about?
Well, I was, when I wasn't worrying about the money running out, I was, being out in nature for me has always been, and there's always something to look at. Always, always, always. I mean, some of the little insects, tool using. Okay, saw tool using in the chimps. That wasn't surprising at all, and quite honestly, although I knew it was exciting scientifically, it didn't surprise me because they're so intelligent. But we saw, you get these hunting wasps, and they take a caterpillar, they inject it so it's paralyzed, and it's not very nice, but they dig a hole and they put it down, lay their eggs, and then cover up the hole, and the caterpillar stays alive, and so we saw one of these get a stone in its mouth and hammer down the earth. I mean, tool using in a wasp.
Bloody hell.
Yeah. All these things are so magical. And, I was walking through the Denver airport the other day, and there was a lovely little scene. There was a pair of sparrows, and the male was courting the female, and he wanted to give her food, and she was fluttering her wings and gaping the silly way they do. And every time he came to pick up the crumb, somebody walked by, and he had to fly it. Finally, he got it, and was able to. Not one single person stopped to watch this little drama. Not one. They were all, texting, and it was very sad, actually. And I see so many things like that as I'm traveling around.
And even as you describe it now, your sense of wonder is absolutely contagious. But I'm sitting here thinking, I wouldn't have noticed that.
No, you probably wouldn't.
No.
But then, I'm trained to watch. And there's also in airports you can watch human behavior too.
Yeah, which is pretty lovely too. I want to talk about Roots and Shoots. How important is hope?
If we don't have hope, we may as well give up. I mean, if you think it's too late, then why would you bother? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Let's even increase our unsustainable way of life. Let's get the most out of it we can before it all crashes. But do you think it's a tall fare to bring a child into the world if you don't have any hope for that child's future?
No, I don't.
It's not, is it?
But at what stage does hope recuse us from action? At what stage is hope naive? At what stage is hope not material? In other words, how do we make hope galvanize us into doing something?
Well, I think if we have hope, but we also realize that as I say, the window's closing. And then we have all these amazing young people. I mean, there's people like Maha everywhere I go, every country, every Roots and Shoots group. It's all over Africa, it's all over Asia. Got 2,000 groups in China. It's everywhere. The young people are rising. They understand. They know that they've got to take action.
And do you think, when you describe amazing young people, do you think that the young people that you are seeing now, that age group, the Roots and Shoots age group, are more amazing than they were 10 or 20 or 30 years ago? Clearly more determined to respond to climate change, aren't they?
Well, yes, but they're more, they seem to have understood that there's a big problem, and they are right. It's almost as though something is being drawn out of them in response to the need. But you say that they're that age, that preschool, university, everything in between. We've even got Roots and Shoots in some prisons and some retirement homes, giving the old people a new lease of life. So Roots and Shoots does actually work for everybody, but it's designed for youth. And it's the youth, we've messed up their whole future. We must work with them. So the goal is to get a critical mass of young people who understand we need money to live. But if we live for money, then it starts to go wrong. Unless we live for money to make the world a better place, like giving money to JGI. But you asked a little while ago, and I must bring Cow in, because Cow will be terribly angry if she'll moo all night and keep me awake. When you said, what can we do, what little things can we do, one thing we can do is to eat less meat. And as, so as more and more people around the world get wealthier, meat becomes a status symbol, and people are eating more and more, and the waste of it. Go to Texas and look at the ribs of, I mean, it's disgusting. And so people are eating more and more. That one leads to the horrible cruelty of the factory farms. Two, they have to be fed, so areas of habitat are cleared to grow the grain to feed them. Then the masses of fossil fuel to get the grain to the animals, to the abattoir, to the table. And then you've got the water that's used to turn vegetable to animal protein. And then, you know, food goes in that end and gas comes out the other. And that's methane, and that's a very virulent greenhouse gas. So in all those ways, and some people say, well, I don't think animals that we breed to eat feel anything. Well, that's absolutely stupid. And I watched I watched a video the other day, and the calf was being taken off to market, and it was a very tiny one. And the mother is rushing down the road after the car. Even when the trucks disappeared, she's still going along the road. It's just heartbreaking. They do have feelings, and certainly the pigs. And, you know, but if people don't care about the animals and they don't care about the environment, these poor creatures are given antibiotic just to keep them alive. It means the bacteria build up resistance. That's why you get the superbugs. You can die from a scratched finger going infected with no antibiotic that will cure it.
And so the complexity arises because everything you've said is right and indisputable. And those of us who bother to think about dairying, and I think we increasingly are, understand that the calves are removed from the mother and often are destroyed immediately. So they're not used in any way. No. So that the mother can keep producing milk. So we understand there is an innate cruelty at the heart of that industry. And we understand that the cows that we eat, the meat that we eat is from a farming practice that produces methane. But you are speaking in a country where the economy is fueled by those activities. I know. So how do we both respond and retain? Or can't we? Do we have to make tough decisions? Do we have to get into other forms of farming? How do we transition without a kind of destruction of what keeps us afloat?
Well, I'm not a seer. I can't answer all these questions, but this is where I keep coming back to this intellect. If we can send a rocket to Mars, can we not get together and find alternative livelihoods for the farmers, other uses for their land, just like we've done in the communities around Gombe? They now support us in conservation, and we found alternative ways for them to live, like they're doing a lot of honey in the woodlands, and they're doing shade-grown coffee, and the animals and birds are coming back. You know, so there has to be a way, and this is your problem in New Zealand, not my problem.
No, and
I don't mean you, I mean
well,
New Zealand.
I live here.
Yeah, you live here.
Yeah. But it's also an effort of will, isn't it? How hard are we prepared to try?
Well,
how hard have we?
That's the point.
Yeah. How hard have we tried? Have we tried at all?
No, we've gone the opposite way.
In fact, you're right. There's been a significant number of dairy conversions in New Zealand in the past 20 or 30 years. We used to be built on the back of a sheep, which is much softer on the land, bless it, than a cow, right?
Yeah.
So it's an effort of will that is required.
It's an effort of will.
And imagination and audacity.
And intellect to try and find other ways to do things. But you know, the awful thing is we have to admit the world is not black and white. There's an awful lot of grey in between. And so often you get a solution to one problem, I've done it, only to find this causes another problem over there. So we have to be flexible, adaptable, quick thinking, but I know we could do it if we really got together and tried. It's like, you know, all these, like in New Zealand, this is a pest or vermin. Who brought the rats here? We did. And they're highly intelligent. So yes, they are harming the indigenous animals, and therefore they need to go. But if we really tried, I'm sure we could find a a better way of getting rid of them and the possums and other creatures. So we're too quick just to say, we have to do it, and so it doesn't matter how we do it.
You know, you were talking before, and you said, how many times did you speak last year? How many days did you travel last year?
Last year, I think slightly over 300 days. Well, I mean, not traveling, but away from home.
And any idea how many times you spoke, how many groups, how many meetings you spoke to, how many occasions like this?
I think somebody worked it out, but you know, sometimes it's 2 in a day. I had to go to Davos this year. Didn't want to. There I had 4 or 5 talks per day, and I had bronchitis, so it was a nightmare. And that takes me out of my comfort zone, going to things like that. A meeting with all these CEOs and people, but it seemed to work.
You have a profound sense of obligation, though, don't you? Still. You still don't feel you've discharged it. You still don't feel like you can sit back and think, wow.
But the world isn't a better place yet. It's getting better, though.
Is it?
Well, there's far more people now who are trying to do their bit. And you know, the reason I can't stop is that after a lecture, almost every lecture, somebody will come up and say, I'd given up, but I promise you I'm now going to do my bit. I've been thinking I'm going to do a lot more. So how can I stop when we've got such a short time in which to make change?
And how can you stop when the Jane Goodall Institute is doing such good work and is beginning to make a material difference, and really, globally now, how many countries in the world is the Jane Goodall Institute in?
35.
Yeah.
And Roots and Shoots in 60.
Yeah, that's really something, isn't it? And also, look at you there. Is there another environmentalist, conservationist, naturalist, or whatever that would get that kind of photo on the front page? Do you think? I mean, is there anyone else? Maybe David Attenborough?
Probably.
Maybe. If he robbed a bank? Yeah, maybe David Attenborough, but you, right? And you understand that, don't you? But with that comes the most extraordinary generosity. You are giving your life to this.
I suppose so, yes. But then I get a lot back. I meet these amazing people, you know, and there's a lot of feedback. I remember giving one lecture and I was completely exhausted, and then there was a long line of people coming and, you know, saying, wanting a photo, but, you know, saying nice things and how they changed their mind and stuff like that. And the woman who was helping me, she looked at me and she said, they're feeding you, aren't they? And I thought that was a very profound remark that she made, because I give out, but then it comes back. And then because I feel there's a great spiritual power, I get it from there too.
Are you religious?
Well, I grew up as a Christian.
Yes, of
My
course,
grandfather was. I certainly believe in a great spiritual power, and some of the best brains on the planet believe that there's intelligence behind the universe. So you can say it was created by the Big Bang, and it was. But something happened to make a Big Bang, didn't it?
You're just going to have to go and sit somewhere and watch and watch and watch. Can you report back to us?
That'll be when I moved on to the next whatever.
I want to go on to this one.
Leaky.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, but for him, Rusty, Leaky, Mum, David Greybeard, great characters in my life.
Rusty the dog.
Rusty the dog, David Greybeard the chimp, Mum, Louis Leakey.
You were talking before how you were doing the excavation with them, or what, you know, the digging and the cleaning and the yeah, and that you happened to be right place, right time, the secretarial skills, but he knew, didn't he? He knew.
Somehow he did.
And what was it?
Well, I suppose he just sensed that I think he was very impressed by, how much I'd learned about the animals. And then he watched me. He said I did all the right things at Olduvai when I met rhinos and lions.
Yes, I'm sure that's true, but he would have come across precocious and intelligent and clever kids before, and he would have come across kids before who'd, were able to. So he knew something.
There weren't so many people wanting to go and live in the middle of nowhere.
No.
There weren't. Not then. There are now.
But he knew something else about you, didn't he? And he was so right, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. But he also thought women were made better observers, and he also liked the fact that I hadn't been to college and that my mind wasn't cluttered up with what he called the reductionist thinking of science at the time. It was very reductionist.
Yeah. Gosh, he must have been proud of you.
Yes, I think he was.
What did he say to you?
Well, he was a sort of, I don't know. He wasn't very...
He was a bit stiff upper lip.
It wasn't stiff upper lip. He just was rather buried in his own thoughts. He would walk past people and not say good morning to them because he didn't really notice them.
He wouldn't have been very good in Gombe, bless him.
He never came to Gombe.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, he never came. Well, his body was not
Yes.
working very well.
Yeah. Who are the people you admire? Who are the people? Oh, this is a great quote. The greatest dangers to our wildlife are greed, poverty, corruption, and apathy. It's greed first and foremost.
Greed. It was Mahatma Gandhi who said, this planet can produce enough for human need, but not human greed.
I was watching a TED talk yesterday or the day before in which he talked about Ecuador and the indigenous people in Ecuador who were losing their forests and their homes and their land to oil exploration. And do you know what? I'd never even heard that story before. And yet that should be a global outrage, shouldn't it?
Yes, well, it's happening all over Latin America now with this new Brazilian president giving away the Amazon rainforest to loggers. That's going to make the most huge impact on the climate because forests are absorbing carbon dioxide and breathing out oxygen, and they have all this biodiversity. And we depend on the forest services. I hate the word services because nature shouldn't be there to serve us. We're part of nature, but we seem not to realize that we're using up the resources sometimes faster than they can be replenished.
And yet these companies have the lobbyists, they pay huge donations to American politicians, for example. They have immense power.
They do. But there is change beginning to creep in, because I've talked to some of the CEOs and they actually know that this won't go on forever, although the melting of the ice is a bit worrying. They want to drill under the Arctic ice now, which is terrifying. But public pressure, we tend very much to blame the big corporations. But we, the consumers, have a role to play here. And I think I know some companies are doing things differently because people are demanding it. So it's changing. I see a lot of change these days.
And there's a lovely quote. I've got it here. Michael Pollan, who you quote in Harvest for Hope, A Guide for Mindful Eating. And he likens consumer choices to pulling single threads out of a garment. We pull a thread from the garment when we refuse to purchase eggs or meat from birds who were raised in confinement, or animals whose beaks were clipped so they could never once taste their natural diet of worms and insects. We pull out a thread when we refuse to bring home a hormone-fattened turkey for Thanksgiving dinner. We pull a thread when we refuse to buy meat or dairy products from cows who are never allowed to chew grass or breathe fresh air or feel the sun on their backs. The more threads we pull, the more difficult it is for the industry to stay intact. Gosh, that's so true, isn't it?
It is so true, yes.
And so consumers can actually lead, can't they?
They can, and that's why we must eliminate poverty so that they can choose too. At the moment they can't, but we can. If we eliminate poverty, then they too can join the swell of voices saying, we don't want it that way.
We're going to take a couple of questions from the floor. Al Gore was right when he said inconvenient truth. It's still inconvenient for us, isn't it?
It's inconvenient, but more people actually believe that it's true.
Yeah, well, it is, isn't it?
Yes. Totally true.
When you look at someone, they really stay looked at. No wonder the oil guys say, oh yes, we're going to change. They're just hoping to get out of the room. There is you are extraordinarily charismatic. Do people feel that? Yeah. Is that something you've worked at, or is it just who you are?
No, I can't help it.
You can't help it.
Do you think I wanted to become who I am now?
I don't know, did you?
No. And I don't know. I honestly sometimes feel I would like somebody to study my life to see how it happened, because I don't know and I don't understand. I didn't want it. I first hid from the media. I hated the fuss. And then I realized that actually if I wanted to see change, the media was really, really important, and that I'd better come out of this shell. And so I've become me. But, you know, the only way I can deal with it, honestly, is to be two people. So there's me, that's talking to you now, and then there's that sort of icon created by Geographic and maybe the media as well. So I have to try and live up to that one. I don't understand. I truly don't understand it. I don't understand how I can keep going like this. I don't understand how I can pull out energy when I'm so exhausted that I think I can't put one foot down, and yet suddenly, poof, it's fine. So, I mean, there has to be some help coming, doesn't there?
Yeah, maybe, or maybe you're just extraordinary. I mean, maybe you have. I wish I wasn't going to use a religious term here, but maybe you have a sacred task. Maybe your sense of duty is so great that you find it every time you think you can make a difference.
Well, people say I do. But I met an extraordinary man from Papua New Guinea who was told by his tribe that he'd been chosen aged 15 to be a messenger, to take out their voice because they want to save their part of Papua New Guinea, which is almost untouched. And so I won't go into his whole story, but I managed to have an hour with him. And he's got a price on his head now from the Indonesian government because he's saying things they don't want him to say. So I wasn't allowed ever to talk about where I met him or anything. And so after a bit, when we'd been talking for about half an hour, he just looked at me and he said, "You realize you're a messenger too?" It was spooky.
Well, he was right. We're going to take a couple of questions from the floor, and I think people emailed or I don't know how. God damn it, I don't know how. Anyway, there are two people
you're
here.
Like me, I don't either.
Well, let's hope they're good questions. Yeah. So Lisa and Spencer, I think it's Lisa and Spencer. Lisa and Spencer, are you here? Where are our questionnaires from the floor? Because I've got more.
Right here.
Right here. Up the top. Are you up the? Sorry, I can't.
We can't see. I mean, we can't see the audience.
Wait. Have you got Lisa and Spencer? Are you up? Have you got? Oh, there you are, waving. A man is up there waving. He's a messenger. He's coming up from the top right. Have you got a microphone? Shout it out.
How do you stay so optimistic in the face of all these issues we're facing with global economic systems and with human-induced climate change?
Did you hear that?
Yes.
It was a very good question, thank you.
Perhaps they didn't hear. He's asking how I stay optimistic in the face of all that's going on. Basically, that's what he's asking. Well, I think, basically, I'm not going to sit back and let the Donald Trumps have it all their own way. And, I already said my reasons for hope, my reasons for optimism is the young people, number one. This brain, which when we use it, when we really try, we can think what we can do. Do you know, every time I look at the moon, I get the same feeling of awe. We put people on the moon. I mean, it's amazing. When I was a child, that was total science fiction. And we'd done it, so the intellect. And then, the fact that nature can come back. Even like I was in Zealandia, in Wellington, that was just totally destroyed by the gold mining. And now it's a beautiful forest with birds.
Yes, it is.
Just beautiful. And I've met so many places like that around the world. And then there's the social media that can gather people together and share our hopes and our fears and our demands on people. And then this indomitable spirit. Those are my reasons for optimism. That if we all get together, we can do it. Hey, I'll test you all out, okay? I'll test you all out. In Tanzania, the young people, Roots and Shoots, that's where it began. We got 2,000 groups, all done by the young people. There's hardly any money, but they leave school, they're waiting for a job, they go into the schools. We just have to give them a little bit of bus money. At the end of one of their gatherings, I was with them in February when we had the celebration of the founding of Roots and Shoots. And there were about 400 high school, university. There were Muslims and there were Christians. They were all working together, which is one of the things we try and do with Roots and Shoots. That's so important today, to bring people of different religion, like Mum sending me to Germany. And at the end of it, they were saying, all across Tanzania, they were saying, together we can. And I said, yes, we can, but will we? So now they say, together we can, together we will. And I want to see how many of you out there would join in. How many of you believe that? Together we can. Together we will. Should we try once more?
Yes.
Because together we can. Together we will. There you are, you see.
And,
Thank you. Okay, guy up there, that's the optimism.
Yes,
That's
yes.
people really want to help.
Lisa, are you here? Where are you? Are you?
Who?
Oh yeah. Oh, thank you. Can you yell it out as well?
Essentially, it was just how do we get more people to get involved and make change? People outside this group, otherwise making change.
Did you hear that? So how do we get people outside of this room to make change? And I think the question, because I think it's a really good question, and in part, how do we get the people who don't feel able to make change for socioeconomic reasons, for example, or for people who are up against it in all sorts of ways, and this is just another weight they can't carry? How do we enable people who aren't yet where this room is to make change?
Well, that's why I say we've got to do something about alleviating poverty, because when you can still, when you're really poor, there's still things you can do. You can meet somebody and make them smile. You can help them. You can help a little wounded animal or leave it alone. So even in these little small ways, they may not be the kind of difference that we can make. They can't choose what to buy because they've got to buy the cheapest. But there may be little choices they can make even there, but they can certainly help each other. They can certainly help animals.
We're going to end with an example of that, and it's pretty magic, and it's Wounda, and Chipunga is where we are, And we're going to end with a video which is a story of hope, isn't it?
It's a real story of hope. Do you want to say something else first?
Well, do you want to say something else first?
No, I don't, but you.
Well,
You're very good at pulling things together.
Okay. Well, Emma, thanks very much. Well, that's why old Leaky sent you, isn't it? Because he knew you'd come back and boss everyone to get the outcome. So what I want to pull together is, 1, my admiration for you, and 2, my gratitude for you, and 3, my sense that you carry an enormous burden, not just on behalf of the chimpanzees, but on behalf of our planet. And there might be days that you want to recuse yourself from that. There might be days that you want to give yourself a day off or just disappear without trace. But what 300 days of traveling last year tell us is that you never, ever stop carrying that burden and that weight. And that makes you heroic. It does. It does. And I won't allow you to, and it makes you wonderful. And what you've done tonight, there's 2,000 people in this room you've charged our batteries. And so we will go out. No.
Good.
And we will all behave differently. We will. Jesus. And we're learning fast. Thanks to you. You've achieved audience participation, not easy with a New Zealand crowd. But the key message from tonight is that if we act locally and think locally, and locally can be our kitchens, our supermarkets, the way we get to and from work, all of those small actions, then incrementally and together we can make change, right? That's your message, right?
And knowing that people are doing it all around the world, then we can think globally. We dare to think globally then.
So it's the solidarity of effort, isn't it?
Yes.
Was that all right? That's
Perfect. Well, I will introduce Wunda, because Wunda in the local language, this is in Congo, and where we have the largest chimpanzee sanctuary for orphan chimps in Africa, which, when I went on that trip back in 1987 in Africa, trying to find out about the chimp problems, one of them, I've said, was shooting mothers to steal babies. And I saw one of these little 1-year-old infant tied up with a rope round his waist in an African market, surrounded by all these tall, laughing men in the hot sun. And he was curled up on his side and his eyes were glazed. And I went over to him and I made the little, it doesn't work. Anyway, little soft panting sound that is a close-up chimpanzee greeting. And this little creature sat up and reached out like this. And I knew I had to do something. That was the beginning of our sanctuary programs. And there's quite a few now, different people have done them. But anyway, this chimp, Wunda, her mother was shot, she was wounded. She came to the sanctuary, Chimpunga, and we have a wonderful veterinarian who runs the sanctuary, Rebecca Tensia. And Rebecca saved her life. And then later on, when Wunda was about 9, adolescent, she got really, really, really sick. And Rebecca was on leave and she came rushing back and she did the first chimp-to-chimp blood transfusion and saved her life again. Now we've got these, the video shows it, these beautiful islands the government has given us. And so I happened to be there and Wunda was being released. And so when you, some of you will have seen this video, but when you watch it, try and imagine that you're actually there. Try and imagine how it felt when this extraordinary thing happened to me. And if you look very closely, you'll see what otherwise you wouldn't see, that during this extraordinary experience, I get a little kiss from Woonda on the arm. You'll see if you're watching. And try and imagine what it was like, because it was probably the most amazing thing that's ever happened to me. So we can watch it. This is a really exciting moment for me. The Jane Goodall Institute's Chimpunga Chimpanzee Rehabilitation Center in the Republic of Congo has for years been caring for infants whose mothers were killed, mostly for the illegal bushmeat trade. Many of them are now fully grown. Recently, we acquired 3 large forested islands on the beautiful Kwilu River, where we can release many of the chimpanzees from our overcrowded center. In here is Woonda, and she nearly died, but thanks to Rebecca, she came back from the dead. And here she is about to come out into this paradise. She's the 15th chimpanzee to get her freedom here. And we hope ultimately to have about 60 on the island. Today is the first time I've met Woonda. I talked to her on the boat, trying to reassure her. She must have wondered what was happening. None of us could predict exactly what she would do once the cage door opened. It was a very, very touching moment. One of the most amazing things that's ever happened to me. The warmth of her embrace is something I shall never forget. For Woonda and all the other chimpanzees we're working to bring here, Chinzula Island will provide a wonderful forest home where they will be cared for and safe. So a tiny update. We have all our females. We've got nearly 170 chimpanzees now in this center, and it's very expensive, and still babies are coming in occasionally. So all our females are on birth control, and well, there's nowhere to put them. You know, we can't have lots more babies. In all these years, only one transplant has gone wrong, and that was Woonda. Woonda is now the dominant female of a group of 30, and 3 years ago, she gave birth to a healthy little girl, and mother and child are doing well, and we've called that baby Hope.
That's ladies and gentlemen, I think that's a beautiful note to end on, because it's about the difference effort can make. And so let's end on the final word you said, which was baby Hope. It's been such a privilege and a pleasure being in your company this evening. Thank you, not only for tonight, but everything you have done since 1960.
Well, it's wonderful being with you as well.
Thank you.
And
thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jane Goodall.